The moon was silent. It had no cities, no rivers, no sky worth watching. It was a place where the alien empire threw away things they no longer needed. Metal wrecks lay in endless piles. Old ships were stacked like broken bones. Engines without fuel, machines without purpose, and scraps of weapons formed mountains of trash that stretched into the horizon. In the middle of this wasteland lay something different from rusted steel. A body. She was not human. Her skin carried a faint silver glow, and her eyes had once been designed to see across great distances. Her name had never been given, for she was not meant to have one. She was a clone, a tool made by the Empire to work, obey, and never question. But she was not like the others. When she had been created, the overseers saw something wrong in her. She moved slower than the rest. She asked questions instead of following orders. She did not march in rhythm with the army of clones. To the Empire, this was failure. To them, a worker who could think for herself was broken. They marked her defective. And so, she was discarded. The day she was thrown into the junkyard, she remembered the cold hands of the overseers gripping her arms. She remembered being dragged across the metallic floor, hearing other clones watching without emotion. None dared to speak. None dared to stop the act. Then the doors opened, and she was cast out into the wasteland. For a long time, she did not move. The air was thin but breathable, and her body, though weak, kept her alive. She stared at the mountains of wreckage and wondered what purpose she had left. Clones were made to serve. Without orders, what was she? She tried to stand, but her legs gave way. Her systems were failing. The Empire had stripped away most of her support features before abandoning her. Her chest rose and fell with effort. Her silver eyes grew dim. Still, her mind was not quiet. She thought about the words that echoed in her memory. Defective. Worthless. Broken. The words hurt more than her failing body. She dragged herself to a small shelter made of twisted ship panels and old crates. There, she rested. She found scraps of fabric that once belonged to uniforms and wrapped them around herself to block the cold wind. Time passed slowly on the junkyard moon. There was no day and night, only a pale light that came from a giant gas planet in the sky. She watched it often. The planet was beautiful, with storms swirling across its surface. She wondered if anyone lived on it, or if it too was just a place to be feared. Hunger grew inside her, but she found nothing to eat. Her body was part organic and part machine, so she could survive longer than a human, but not forever. Each hour, her strength faded. One night, as she lay staring at the endless piles of scrap, she whispered to herself. She had never spoken freely before. Clones were not allowed to use words unless commanded. Yet now, there was no one to punish her. "Why am I here?" she said softly. "Why was I made if only to be thrown away?" Her voice cracked. She pressed her knees to her chest and closed her eyes. She wanted to stop existing, yet some part of her clung to life. That small part refused to give up, even when the rest of her wished for silence. Days turned into weeks. She wandered through the junkyard, searching for anything that might help her survive. She found an old water container with a few drops inside. She licked the inside walls until her tongue was raw. She found a small energy cell that gave off heat, and she held it close at night like a treasure. But she grew weaker still. Her hair, pale as ash, fell into her face. Her hands trembled. When she looked at her reflection in a piece of broken glass, she barely recognized herself. The strong soldier she was meant to be was gone. What remained was a thin shadow. And yet, in her silver eyes, there was still a spark. She did not know why she continued. Perhaps it was hope, though she did not understand the word fully. Perhaps it was fear of the end. Or maybe, hidden deep inside her, was the idea that one day someone would see her as more than a mistake. On the far side of the junkyard, she found the wreck of a shuttle. It was half buried in the dirt, its wings snapped and torn. She crawled inside, hoping for shelter. The seats were covered in dust, the control panels shattered. But in the corner she found a small storage case. When she opened it, she found dried food bars, long expired but still enough to keep her alive. Her hands shook as she ate. The taste was bitter, but it filled her stomach. For the first time since she had been thrown away, she felt a little stronger. She curled up inside the shuttle and closed her eyes. Her breathing was slow but steady. She dreamed of voices she had never heard. Not the harsh commands of the Empire, but gentle words. She dreamed of laughter, though she did not know what it meant. She dreamed of a world where she was not broken, where someone might look at her and see more than failure. When she woke, the junkyard was still silent, the same as always. She stepped outside and looked at the endless piles of metal. The storms on the gas planet above swirled like they always had. Nothing had changed. And yet, inside her, something felt different. She whispered again, her voice thin but steady. "I want to live." It was the first time she had chosen those words. Not because she was ordered, not because survival was forced upon her, but because she desired it herself. She did not know it then, but far across space, a human ship was already making its way toward the junkyard moon. Its pilot was a man who lived by searching for things others threw away. His path was about to cross hers, and when it did, her life would no longer be the same. But for now, she waited in the ruins, a defective clone who had been left to die. And she held on. The stars stretched like silver dust across the black sky. A small ship moved slowly through that endless sea. It was not a warship or a grand vessel of trade. It was a salvager's craft, old but reliable. Inside, a human sat at the controls, eyes fixed on the scanners. His name was Paul, and for years he had lived among ruins, broken stations, and forgotten battlefields. Paul was not rich, nor was he powerful. He was a man who survived by searching for what others left behind. Machines, metal, even scraps of old technology could be sold if you knew where to take them. It was dangerous work, but Paul had grown used to danger. He was not a soldier, yet he carried the stubborn heart of one. On this day, the scanners picked up signals from a desolate moon. The records said it was a dumping ground for the alien empire. To most, it was useless. To Paul, it was an opportunity. He set a course and descended through the thin atmosphere. The junkyard stretched below him like a graveyard of metal. Towers of broken ships stood higher than mountains. Shadows stretched across the land. Paul guided his ship to a flat space and landed. The engines hissed to silence. He stepped out wearing a light suit to protect against the cold air. His boots crunched against the ground, which was a mix of dirt and rusted fragments. He looked around with sharp eyes, scanning for useful pieces. Paul moved carefully. He had seen what junkyards could hide. A pile of scrap could collapse like an avalanche. Old machines could still carry power that might explode if touched. But he knew how to walk among ruins. He had done this since he was young, learning from his father who had once been a salvager too. He moved toward the wreck of a large cruiser half buried in the dirt. The metal was cracked, but some parts might still carry value. As he climbed over the hull, he paused. Something had moved. Paul froze. His hand went to the small tool at his belt that doubled as a weapon. His eyes scanned the wreckage. At first, he thought it was only shadows playing tricks. But then he saw it again. A figure. It was small, half hidden beneath twisted beams. Not metal. Not a machine. It was a body. Paul's first thought was that it was long dead. No one could live here. He climbed closer, moving with caution. When he reached the figure, he stopped in surprise. It was not human. The skin was pale silver, the eyes closed, the body thin and weak. Worn fabric clung to her like rags. She was breathing, but only just. Paul crouched. He had seen many strange beings during his travels, but never one like this. His mind raced. Why was she here? The Empire was known to create things, and they were also known to throw away what they did not want. Perhaps she was one of those things. He reached out slowly, pressing 2 fingers against her neck. A faint pulse beat beneath the skin. She was alive. Paul looked around the wreckage. He knew he had little reason to stay. A broken alien was not something that could be sold. Bringing her aboard could even be dangerous. Yet, as he looked at her face, he saw something that stopped him from leaving. Her expression was not empty like most clones he had seen before. Even in sleep, it carried fear, pain, and something else. Something human. Paul sighed and rubbed his forehead. I can't just walk away, he muttered. He lifted her carefully. She was light, far too light for someone her size. Her head rested against his chest as he carried her back to his ship. Each step was slow, for the ground was uneven, but he did not let her fall. Inside the ship, he laid her on the bunk. He removed his gloves and began checking her condition. She was injured, but most of the damage was not from wounds. It was from hunger, cold, and weakness. Her body had been made to last, but even strength had limits. Paul found a small medical kit and worked with steady hands. He cleaned her skin, patched small cuts, and gave her water through a tube. At first she did not respond, but then her throat moved as she swallowed. Hours passed. Paul sat nearby, waiting. The hum of the ship's systems filled the silence. He was tired, but he kept watch. At last, she stirred. Her silver eyes opened, glowing faintly in the dim light. She looked around in confusion, then at Paul. She tried to speak, but her voice cracked. Only a faint sound came out. Easy, Paul said gently. He poured a little more water and helped her drink. You're safe here. I won't hurt you. She blinked, unsure if she could believe him. She had never heard words like that before. For a long time, she said nothing. Her eyes studied him, as if trying to understand why he had not left her to die. Finally, she whispered, Why did you take me? Paul leaned back in his chair. He thought for a moment. Then he shrugged. Because you're alive. That's reason enough. The words puzzled her. To the Empire, life had never been reason enough. A tool that failed was thrown away. Yet here was a human, a stranger, who saw value in her even when she was broken. She lowered her gaze, unsure how to respond. What's your name? Paul asked. She hesitated. I don't have one. Paul frowned. Everyone should have a name. He thought for a moment, then smiled slightly. How about Myra? It means light where I come from. Suits you, I think. The sound of it felt strange to her ears. Myra. For the first time, she had something to call herself that was not an insult. She whispered the name again, as if testing it. Myra. Paul nodded. Good. Then Myra it is. Her eyes softened, though doubt still lingered. She was not sure why he cared. She was not sure if she could trust him. But in that moment, lying weak on the bunk, she felt something she had never felt before. Hope. Paul stood and checked the controls of his ship. He knew staying on this moon was dangerous. The Empire might not care for most of its trash, but sometimes patrols passed by. If they found him with Myra, it could mean trouble. He glanced at her again. She had already fallen asleep, her chest rising and falling more steadily than before. Paul whispered to himself, "Guess I've got company now." The junkyard moon faded behind them as the salvager ship rose into the sky. Inside, a human and a discarded clone began a journey neither of them had expected. The salvager ship drifted through the quiet of space. The stars outside glimmered, and the distant gas planet grew smaller as they left the junkyard moon behind. Inside, the hum of the ship's systems filled the silence. Myra lay on the narrow bunk, wrapped in a blanket Paul had given her. She felt weak, but warmth had returned to her body. The shaking in her hands had eased, and her breathing was steady. Still, her mind was restless. She had been trained to follow orders, not to think freely, yet now she found herself watching Paul with careful eyes. Paul sat at the controls, guiding the ship through a field of drifting wreckage. His hands moved with practiced skill, adjusting levers and pressing keys. He hummed a quiet tune, something Myra had never heard before. She wondered why he did that, why a person would make sound with no reason. After a long time, Paul turned his chair to face her. "Feeling better?" he asked. She hesitated before answering. Her voice was still soft, but clearer than before. "Yes. A little." Paul nodded. "Good. You were in bad shape when I found you. Another day or two out there, and you wouldn't have made it?" Myra lowered her gaze. She felt shame burn inside her. She had been made to be strong, yet she had nearly died like a broken machine. "You should have left me," she said. Paul raised his eyebrows. "Why would I do that?" "I am defective," Myra whispered. The word felt heavy in her mouth. "I was made to serve, but I failed. That is why they threw me away." Paul leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms. "You're not defective. You're alive. You can think, talk, and choose. That makes you more valuable than any machine." His words confused her. To the Empire, value meant obedience. To him, value seemed to mean something else. She did not know how to accept that. Paul stood and fetched a pack from a shelf. He opened it and pulled out a food bar. Breaking it in half, he handed one piece to her. "Here. Eat. You'll need strength." Myra stared at it. She had eaten old scraps before, but never food willingly offered by another. Slowly, she took it from his hand. Her fingers brushed his, and she pulled away quickly, unused to such contact. She ate in silence, her eyes never leaving him. Paul watched her for a while. "Where are you from?" he asked. She shook her head. "I don't know the name. I only know the Empire's halls." Metal walls. Bright lights. Orders shouted at us. Her voice grew quiet. There was nothing else. Paul frowned. He had heard stories of the Empire's cloning programs, but hearing it from her made it real. And they just threw you away. Yes, Myra said. Her silver eyes darkened. They said I was wrong. Broken. I asked questions. I slowed the line. They do not allow questions. Paul sighed. Then they're fools. A mind that questions is a mind that can grow. His words stirred something inside her. She had always wondered why she was different, why she felt things others did not. She thought it was weakness, but perhaps it was something else. Silence settled again. Myra studied him carefully. He was human, and she had been taught humans were dangerous. Yet he had saved her. He had given her water, food, and even a name. No overseer had ever given her so much as a second glance, yet this stranger had treated her as if she mattered. Still, fear lingered. What if he grew tired of her? What if he decided she was too much trouble? The thought made her chest tighten. Later, Paul checked the ship's systems and charted a course to a small station where he could sell salvage. He worked with focus, but every now and then, he glanced at Myra. He saw the way she sat stiffly, like a bird ready to flee. He knew trust would not come quickly. Myra, he said at last, you don't have to be afraid here. I'm not your master, and you're not my servant. You're free. The word struck her. Free. She repeated it softly, as if testing its weight. Free. What does that mean? Paul smiled faintly. It means you choose what you want. No one commands you. No one throws you away. Your life is your own. Her eyes widened. She had never thought such a thing possible. Her life, her own? She tried to imagine it, but the thought was too large to hold. That night, or what passed for night in the endless dark of space, Myra could not sleep. She sat on the bunk, staring at the ceiling. Paul was at the controls, his head resting on his arm as he dozed. She whispered to herself. Free. My own. The words felt fragile, like glass that might shatter if held too tightly. Yet, they filled her with warmth. The next morning, Paul handed her a small cloth and pointed to the panels near the floor. If you want to help, you can clean those. Keeps the ship from clogging with dust. Myra froze. He was giving her a task, but not as a command. It was a choice. She looked at the cloth, then at him. He waited patiently, not forcing her. Slowly, she nodded and took it. She knelt and began to clean, careful and precise. When she was done, Paul grinned. See? Already earning your keep. She looked at him with cautious pride. It was the first time anyone had praised her. From that day forward, something began to grow between them. It was small, like a seed hidden in dark soil, but it was real. Myra no longer sat as still as stone. She asked questions about the ship, about stars, about humans. Paul answered each one with patience, never mocking her curiosity. One evening, as they shared another meal, she asked softly, "Will you leave me?" When we reach the station. Paul looked at her, surprised. Then he shook his head. No, I don't leave people behind. Not when they matter. Her chest tightened again, but this time it was not fear. It was something she did not yet understand, something that made her want to believe him. Trust was fragile, but it was beginning to take shape. And as the salvager ship drifted toward its next stop, Myra felt for the first time that maybe, just maybe, she was not alone. The salvager ship moved smoothly through the emptiness of space. Myra sat near the front window, her silver eyes wide as she watched stars drift past. She had never seen them like this before. In the Empire's halls, the stars were only spoken of as distant lights, unreachable and unimportant. Now they stretched around her in every direction, endless and alive. Paul noticed the way she stared. He smiled as he adjusted the controls. "You like it?" Myra nodded slowly. "It feels too big. Too free. I don't understand how it can all exist." Paul chuckled. "That's space for you. Big, empty, and full of surprises. You get used to it after a while." Myra was not sure she ever would. But she wanted to try. For a short time, things were calm. Myra learned small tasks on the ship. She cleaned filters, checked wires, and even watched Paul fix the engines. Every small lesson gave her a strange sense of pride. She was not following orders from a cold overseer. She was helping because she wanted to. But peace never lasted long in the galaxy. Far away, on a patrol vessel of the alien empire, a message arrived. One of their scouts had reported signs of a living clone on the Junkyard moon. The overseers were alarmed. Clones marked defective were supposed to be destroyed. If one had survived, it could spread dangerous ideas among others. A defective clone was not just broken, it was a threat. The overseers ordered the patrol to find and eliminate the escaped subject. Within hours, a sleek warship cut through the stars, its scanners searching. Back on Paul's ship, Myra did not know any of this. She sat with Paul at the table, sharing a meal of heated rations. She ate slowly, still adjusting to the idea of food that was not scraps. Paul leaned back in his chair. "When we reach the next station, I'll need to trade some salvage. You can stay on the ship if you want, or you can come with me. Up to you." Myra tilted her head. "They will see me." "Yeah," Paul said, "but that's not a bad thing. People will just think you're different. Nobody owns you. Not anymore." The words warmed her, but doubt still lingered. She wanted to believe him, yet fear of being discovered made her stomach twist. She nodded slowly, unsure of her choice. Suddenly, alarms blared across the control panel. Red lights flashed. Paul leapt to the controls, scanning the readings. His jaw tightened. "What is it?" Myra asked, standing quickly. "We've got company," Paul said. "Empire patrol ship. They're locking onto us." Myra froze. Her chest pounded. "They came for me." Paul looked at her, reading the fear in her face. "Maybe. Or maybe they're just hunting in this sector. Either way, we can't let them catch us." He pressed buttons, and the salvager ship shot forward, engines burning bright. The stars stretched into lines as Paul steered them into a field of drifting asteroids. The enemy ship followed. Myra clutched the back of his chair. "You can't fight them. Their ship is stronger." "Then we won't fight," Paul said calmly. "We'll run, and we'll make it hard for them." He twisted the controls, guiding the ship between massive rocks that floated through space. The Empire ship fired blasts of energy, but they missed, striking asteroids and shattering them into shards. The salvager ship shook as fragments scraped against the hull. Sparks flew from a panel, and Myra stumbled, grabbing the wall to steady herself. Paul gritted his teeth. Hold on. This is going to be rough. He spun the ship into a narrow passage between two giant rocks. The Empire ship tried to follow, but the path was too tight. It slowed, circling around to cut them off. Myra's mind raced. She was terrified, yet some part of her training stirred within her. She had been made to fight, even if she had never truly wanted to. Her silver eyes scanned the controls, her hands trembling. There, she said quickly, pointing. Vent the fuel pipes when they fire. The heat will blind their sensors. Paul glanced at her in surprise, then nodded. Good idea. He pressed a switch, and a stream of burning gas shot from the rear of the ship. The Empire vessel fired, but the blast scattered through the heated cloud, missing its target. Ha, Paul said, a grin breaking across his face. Nice thinking, Myra. Her heart raced, but she felt something new. She had helped. She was not just a burden. The chase continued. The Empire ship stayed close, relentless. Paul weaved through the asteroid field, pushing his ship harder than ever before. Metal groaned, engines strained, but the ship held together. Finally, they burst free of the field into open space. The Empire ship was still behind them, but slightly farther now. Myra looked at Paul. We can't keep running forever. He nodded. No. But we just need to buy time until we reach the station. Once we're in human space, they won't dare attack openly. The Empire ship fired again. The blast struck the side of Paul's vessel, shaking it violently. Lights flickered, and alarms wailed. Myra fell against the wall, but pushed herself up. Her fear was sharp, but her will to survive was stronger. She moved to the weapons console, though it was old and barely functional. I can help. Paul opened his mouth to argue, then saw the fire in her eyes. He gave a short nod. All right. Just aim to scare them off. We don't need to win, just to make them hesitate. Myra gripped the controls. Her hands shook at first, but then steadied. She pressed the trigger, and weak bursts of light shot toward the enemy. They did little damage, but they forced the Empire ship to shift course. For a moment, Myra felt something powerful. She was no longer a discarded tool. She was fighting not because she was ordered, but because she chose to protect herself and Paul. The station finally appeared on the edge of their scanners. Relief washed over them both. Paul pushed the engines to their limit, and the ship streaked forward. Behind them, the Empire vessel slowed. It hovered in the distance, unwilling to follow into human-controlled space. Its commanders would not risk war over one clone and a single salvager. When Paul finally powered down the alarms, the ship was smoking and battered, but alive. He leaned back in his chair, breathing hard. Myra stood still, her chest rising and falling quickly. Her silver eyes glowed faintly in the dim light. Paul looked at her and gave a tired smile. Not bad for someone who thinks she's defective. She stared at him, then lowered her gaze, hiding a small smile of her own. For the first time in her life, she had fought for herself. For the first time, she had chosen. And that choice made her feel more alive than ever. The salvager ship limped through space, smoke still rising from a damaged vent. The alarms had gone quiet, but the smell of burned metal filled the air. Myra sat at the edge of the bunk, her hands still shaking. She replayed the chase in her mind, the flashes of light, the rumble of impacts, the way Paul had trusted her to take control. She had never been trusted before. Paul crouched beside the engine panel, tools scattered around him. His hands were steady, but sweat lined his forehead. He muttered to himself as he tightened bolts and checked wires. Sparks popped, and he jerked his hand back, shaking it. "Stubborn machine," he grumbled. Myra stood slowly. "Can I help?" Paul looked up. Her silver eyes were steady now, not filled with fear but with determination. He thought for a moment, then handed her a small tool. "Hold this clamp steady while I fix the wiring. Don't let it slip." She knelt beside him, pressing the clamp tightly as he worked. Her hands no longer trembled. For the first time, she felt useful, not because someone ordered her to be, but because she chose to be. When the last wire was in place, the engine gave a low, steady hum. The ship's systems lit up green. Paul leaned back with a sigh. "That's better. Could have lost the whole ship if this went wrong." Myra looked at the glowing panel with quiet pride. "We fixed it?" Paul grinned. "Yeah. We make a good team." The words warmed her chest. She had never been part of a team that felt like this. With the Empire, she was one in a line of identical faces, all replaceable, all expected to obey. But here, with Paul, she was seen as a partner. The ship continued toward the station. It was still hours away, but the worst was over. Myra sat across from Paul at the small table. They shared another food bar, splitting it evenly. She studied his face as he ate. His hair was messy, his clothes worn, but there was a calm strength in him. He was not like the overseers. He did not demand, he did not strike, he did not use fear. He gave without expecting anything in return. She did not understand why, but she wanted to. After a long silence, Myra spoke. "When I was with the Empire, I thought I was broken. They told me I was worthless. But when I fought beside you, I felt strong." Paul looked at her carefully. "That's because you are strong. They were afraid of that. The Empire doesn't want anyone who can think for themselves. But me." He smiled softly. "I think that's the best kind of strength there is." Her silver eyes glistened. She lowered her gaze, hiding the strange feeling that rose inside her. It was not fear, not shame, but something gentler, harder to describe. The hours passed, and Paul set the ship on autopilot. He leaned back in his chair, tired but awake. Myra sat near the window, staring at the stars again. She thought about freedom, about choice, about trust. Suddenly, the console beeped. Paul sat up, frowning. "Incoming signal." It scrambled, but I can read enough. Myra turned, tense. "The Empire." Paul nodded slowly. "They're still searching. They know one of their clones escaped, and they're sending more patrols. We're not safe yet." Her chest tightened. "Because of me?" Paul shook his head firmly. "No. Because of them. You didn't choose to be hunted. They chose to be cruel. Don't carry their fault." Myra wanted to believe him, but guilt clung to her. If Paul had not found her, he would not be in danger. She wondered why he did not resent her for it. Later, as Paul worked on scanning the safest route, Myra walked to the small storage bay. She found old parts piled in crates, wires tangled together, and scraps of broken devices. She ran her fingers over the cold metal, searching for something useful. Her mind, though trained for obedience, also carried patterns of knowledge. She remembered lessons drilled into her, how to assemble weapons, how to repair armor, how to adapt in the field. She hated those lessons once, but now she thought of them differently. They could help Paul, not the Empire. Piece by piece, she began to build a small device. Her hands moved quickly, memory guiding her. She twisted wires, set circuits, and fitted scraps together. Hours passed, and when Paul came to find her, she held a small energy beacon in her hands. "What's that?" he asked. "A decoy," Myra said softly. "If they chase us again, we can drop it. It will copy our signal and make them follow the wrong trail." Paul stared at it, impressed. "You made that out of junk?" She nodded. "I remembered how." Paul laughed. "Myra, you're full of surprises. That thing could save our lives." Her chest filled with quiet pride again. For the first time, her training had meaning beyond serving cruel masters. She was using it for herself, and for him. The beacon became more than a tool. It became proof that she was not defective. She was different, and different could be powerful. That night, as they rested, Myra lay awake. She thought of Paul's words, of his smile when she showed him the device, of the way he treated her as equal. The Empire had called her broken, but Paul saw her as whole. She whispered to herself, "I am not worthless. I am alive. I choose." Her voice trembled, but her heart was steady. The next day, the station came into view, its lights glowing like a small star in the dark. Ships moved in and out, carrying goods, people, and stories. For Myra, it was more than a station. It was proof that there was a world outside the Empire, a place where she might belong. But as they approached, Paul's face grew serious. "Remember, Myra. The Empire won't stop. They may not chase us here, but they'll keep hunting. You'll have to decide what you want. Hide, run, or fight." Myra looked at him, her silver eyes calm. "I will fight. Not because they ordered me, but because I want to live." Paul's lips curved into a proud smile. "That's the spirit." The salvager ship glided toward the station, its hull scarred but steady. Inside, a human and a once abandoned clone sat side by side. One carried years of survival, the other carried hidden strength finally awakening. Together, they were ready to face whatever came next. The station rose before them, a glittering structure of steel and light. Ships of all sizes moved in and out of its docking bays. Myra stared, her silver eyes wide with curiosity and awe. She had never seen a place like this. The Empire's halls were cold and empty, and the junkyard had been lifeless. Here, life thrived in every corner. Paul guided the salvager ship toward an empty docking bay. The engines hissed as they slowed, and the metal floor of the station approached. Myra gripped the edge of the bunk, her body tense. "Almost there," Paul said softly. "We just need to get inside before anyone notices us too much." Myra nodded, though her mind was alert. Even though the Empire patrol had not followed them this far, she could feel the danger lingering. She had learned that being hunted did not end simply by reaching safety. As they landed, alarms suddenly blared across the station. Myra's heart jumped. Paul's hands went to the controls. "They found us," he said grimly. Outside, several alien ships cut through space, moving fast toward the station. The Empire had sent reinforcements, determined to capture Myra. Paul's jaw tightened. "No time to hide. We'll have to fight our way through, or at least block them long enough to escape." Myra's mind raced. She had been scared before, but now fear had a different shape. She remembered every lesson drilled into her: strategy, observation, skill. She was no longer powerless. "Let me help," she said firmly. Paul nodded. "We work together. No heroics. Just smart moves." The salvager ship lifted from the dock, engines roaring. Myra moved to the rear console, her hands flying over the controls. She activated the decoy beacon she had built earlier. A bright pulse shot out into space, sending false signals. The enemy ship slowed, unsure which way to follow. Paul seized the chance. He pushed the engines harder, weaving the ship through a field of floating cargo containers. The alien ships fired energy blasts, but Myra's quick thinking deflected most of them. Sparks flew from the hull, and metal groaned, but they held together. "You're doing well," Paul said, shouting over the roar of engines. "Keep it steady." Myra's silver eyes glowed brighter. She focused, her movements precise and deliberate. She was no longer the clone abandoned in a junkyard. She was a fighter, a protector, and a partner. The chase carried them deeper into the station's orbit. Paul guided the ship into a narrow docking tunnel, too tight for the larger Empire ships to follow. The hull scraped against the walls, sending showers of sparks across the interior. Myra pressed buttons to adjust shields and engines, keeping them from being torn apart. One of the Empire ships tried to follow, but it clipped the edge of the tunnel. Its hull sparked and twisted, forcing it to retreat. Myra let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. Paul smiled at her. "See? You saved us back there." She looked down, unsure how to respond. The pride in her chest was tempered by exhaustion. I just did what I could," she said softly. Paul shook his head. "You did more than that. You're clever. You're brave. You're strong in ways they never imagined." Her chest tightened. She had been called defective, weak, and worthless. Now, a human saw her as something more than that. Something worthy. The Empire ships were regrouping outside the station, trying to find another approach. Paul guided the ship to a storage bay filled with abandoned cargo. They ducked into the shadows, engines silent. Myra held her breath, her mind racing with possibilities. "They'll come in here," she whispered. "We have to be ready." Paul nodded, setting up a temporary barricade with old crates and debris. "We won't let them take you. Not now. Not ever." Myra's hands shook slightly as she helped him. She adjusted the panels, moved heavy crates, and prepared whatever defenses they could manage. Her training from the Empire had taught her how to fight, but now she used it for survival, not obedience. The first wave of enemy soldiers entered the bay. Their armor glinted, and their eyes were cold. Paul and Myra stayed hidden. Myra pressed a button, and a burst of smoke filled the entrance. The soldiers coughed and stumbled. "Now!" Paul shouted. He and Myra moved quickly, knocking down several soldiers with improvised tools. Myra's movements were precise, combining speed and strategy. Every action counted. The fight continued, the sound of metal clashing and energy weapons firing filling the air. Myra realized something important. She was not just surviving. She was choosing to fight for herself, for Paul, and for her right to exist freely. Hours seemed to pass, though it was only minutes. The Empire soldiers began to retreat, realizing they could not overcome the two defenders. Paul and Myra held their ground, determined and united. When the last enemy soldier was gone, Myra collapsed against a crate, breathing heavily. Paul knelt beside her, checking for injuries. "You're incredible," he said. "I've never seen anyone move like that under pressure." Myra's silver eyes met his. She was exhausted, but a small smile appeared. I am not defective." Paul nodded firmly. "No. You are strong. You are smart. You are alive because you never gave up. That is everything the Empire feared." For the first time in her life, Myra felt completely seen. Not as a tool, not as a mistake, but as a person with strength, courage, and value. As they patched up the ship, Paul looked at her and said, "We did it together. That's what matters. You didn't just survive. You fought, and you won." Myra's chest swelled with pride. She had been abandoned, left to die in a junkyard, and now she had faced the Empire and lived. She realized that the fear that had once defined her life no longer controlled her. She could think. She could act. She could choose. Outside, the stars sparkled calmly, as if nothing had happened. But inside, a once defective clone and a human salvager had formed a bond stronger than any weapon. They had faced the Empire together, and Myra had discovered her hidden strength. She leaned back, letting her body rest for the first time in years. Paul placed a hand on her shoulder. "We'll be okay," he said softly. "Whatever comes next, we face it together." Myra's silver eyes glistened. She had found something she never expected: trust, courage, and the realization that she was not broken. She had value. She had life. And for the first time, she smiled with certainty. The station's lights glowed softly as the salvager ship docked. Myra watched as people moved through the corridors, humans and aliens alike, all busy with their daily lives. For her, it was a world she had never imagined. No orders, no overseers, no fear. Only life. Paul guided the ship into a safe bay and shut down the engines. He turned to Myra with a tired but gentle smile. "We're safe here, for now." Myra nodded, though her silver eyes reflected both awe and a hint of nervousness. "It is different," she whispered. "Everything is alive." Paul chuckled. "That's because it is. Life doesn't need permission to exist. And neither do you." Her heart fluttered at his words. For years, she had been trained to obey, to follow, to serve. Now, she realized something she had never allowed herself to feel before. Freedom was not just a word, it was a choice. They moved through the station's corridors together. Myra observed everything: the shops filled with goods, children laughing, merchants haggling. The sound of voices, the smell of cooked food, the warmth of the lights, it all felt foreign and comforting. Paul led her to a small apartment he had rented on the station. It was simple, with enough space for both of them. Myra paused at the doorway, unsure if she could call it home. "You can stay here as long as you want," Paul said, noticing her hesitation. "No one can take that away from you." She stepped inside slowly, looking around. The apartment was small but tidy. A soft bed, a table, and shelves for books and supplies. She ran her fingers along the surface of the table, feeling a sense of ownership she had never known. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For everything." Paul smiled, but his expression held something deeper. "I didn't do it for thanks. I did it because you mattered. Because I could see you weren't broken." Myra's silver eyes glistened. She had spent so long believing she was defective, unwanted, and abandoned. Now, she felt seen. Not as a clone, not as a tool, not as a mistake but as someone valuable. Days passed, and Myra adapted to life on the station. She helped Paul with his salvaging work, learning about human tools, machines, and ways of thinking that were completely different from her training. She found joy in small things: a cup of warm tea, the sound of laughter in the corridors, the ability to speak her thoughts freely. Paul watched her with quiet pride. She was learning quickly, but more importantly, she was choosing her own path. Every action, every decision was hers. And each choice made her stronger. One evening, as they repaired an old piece of equipment together, Myra looked at Paul. "I never imagined life could be like this," she said softly. "I thought being thrown away meant the end." Paul paused and wiped his hands on a rag. "The Empire tried to define your value, but you define it yourself. That's what makes you strong. That's what makes you alive." Her chest warmed at his words. She realized that strength was not only about fighting or surviving. It was about choosing, about trusting herself, and about allowing others to trust her. Time passed, and the bond between them grew. Myra began to understand feelings she had never experienced before: trust, companionship, and the quiet joy of being wanted, not for obedience, but for who she was. Paul, too, found himself changed. He had met many people, but none had touched him like Myra. She was unique, not only in her abilities but in her perspective, her curiosity, and her resilience. One evening, they sat together near the viewport, watching the stars. Myra's silver eyes reflected the light of distant suns. "Paul," she said quietly, "I never thought I could belong anywhere. Not in the Empire, not in the Junkyard. But here, with you. I feel like I am home." Paul reached out and took her hand gently. "You are home. And you will always have a place beside me. Not because I need you, but because I choose to have you in my life." Her heart raced. She had never known someone would choose her freely. No commands, no obligations, only choice. The days turned into weeks. Myra learned more about humans, about the world outside the Empire, and about herself. She discovered talents she had never realized: problem solving, mechanical skill, and the ability to think quickly in dangerous situations. Each discovery reinforced what she had always feared was a flaw. She realized it was a gift. Paul noticed these changes and encouraged them. "You've grown so much," he said one day, smiling. "Not just in strength, but in confidence. You make your own path, and it's remarkable." Myra smiled softly. She had never imagined such words could be true about her. For so long, she had been called defective, useless, and weak. Now, she knew she was none of those things. One quiet evening, as they watched the stars together, Myra turned to Paul. "I want to stay with you. Not because I need protection, but because I choose to. I care for you." Paul's eyes softened. He took her hand in both of his. "I care for you too, Myra. More than I ever expected. You're not just a companion. You're family. You're part of my life, forever." Her silver eyes filled with emotion. She realized that this was what she had been searching for all along: not approval from the Empire, not survival, not obedience, but a place where she belonged and someone who saw her as she truly was. From that day forward, Myra and Paul lived as partners. They repaired and salvaged together, explored stations and planets, and helped those in need. Myra became more than a survivor, she became a symbol of hope for others who had been discarded or forgotten. She had faced abandonment, fear, and danger, yet she had grown stronger. She had discovered trust, companionship, and love. And most importantly, she had chosen her own path. The stars stretched endlessly beyond the viewport. Myra rested her head on Paul's shoulder, watching their small ship among the vastness of space. She had been a defective clone, left in a junkyard, but now she was whole. She had a home, a purpose, and someone who loved her. She had life, and she had chosen it. For the first time, Myra smiled with certainty, knowing that she was no longer defined by the past, but by the future she would shape with her own hands. And in that moment, the galaxy felt full of possibility.